Hello everyone. Today I'm going to show you what sourdough starter is. This part of sourdough baking was very confusing to me when I first started watching sourdough making videos. So I'm going to try to help you understand it and be clear about it, but it is a confusing topic. So please comment and ask questions if you need more help on the topic. So sourdough starter is a main ingredient in sourdough bread and other baked goods that you make with sourdough. It is simply a mixture of flour and water. And once that's combined, if left alone, it creates a yeast and a bacteria that in the end becomes a wild form of yeast, and it's naturally made versus commercial yeast that you buy in the store. It helps the bread to rise. So it's just made out of flour and water. It becomes a living yeast and it looks like this. So sometimes starter has been fed. I fed this starter last night and before I went to bed, and when I wake up in the morning, sometimes it's ready to bake with. I left this one too long, so it's not ready to bake with. It's become an unfed starter again. You can see that there are some bubbles in it, but they're not active. So I wouldn't be able to bake sourdough with this, but I am going to feed it, and I'll show you how I feed it. And hopefully by this afternoon, it will become ready and active so that I can bake mixed bread with it this afternoon. This is also unfed starter. And remember, starter is just flour and water mixed together. That's turned into yeast and bacteria. This I keep in the refrigerator, and I have a lot of it that I keep in the refrigerator. This one I keep in the refrigerator also. So these were fed probably a week ago, and what I do is when I feed my starter, and now this has been left too long and it's no longer active, and I'm not going to use it to bake with anything, I pour it into one of these jars and then I put it in the refrigerator. This is starter, this is starter. This afternoon, I will come back on and show you active starter. It's all starter. I did not understand that in the beginning. Now here's the cool thing. I can bake with unfed starter. It just won't make a sourdough loaf of bread rise, but it still adds very good taste and health to other things I make. So for example, all of the items on my menu, cookies, scones, bagels, they're all made with unfed starter. Sometimes I make bagels and sandwich bread with fed starter, and it helps it rise and tastes great that way too. But if I want to make a regular loaf of bread, whether I put inclusions into it or keep it plain, I have to use active starter for it to rise. If it's not active, the loaf will turn out very flat. If it's active, it will puff up and become a big, tall, beautiful loaf of sourdough. So that was really hard for me to understand in the beginning, but this is all starter, but some of it is fed, some of it is unfed. All of it right now is not active starter. So when I go to feed starter, I feed it in ratios. So this also gets confusing for a lot of people online. Most of the questions I see are about this. So I want to show you, I even made a chart for you to look at. This is how starter is fed. I think you can read it, or is it backwards? I don't know. So when you're feeding starter, you start with starter. So I would take a little bit of this and put it in a new jar, and then I would add to it flour, and then I would add to it water. But it is fed more a little bit mathematically. but not tricky mathematics. You can understand this. So if I want to just feed it a little bit, I would feed it a 1:1:1 ratio. Here's an example. So if I just want to feed it a little bit, I just want to keep it alive, kind of like I did last night. I just wanted to keep it fed and alive, but I knew I wasn't going to bake with it or anything. I just needed to give it a little small feeding. Then I might take 20 grams of it out of the jar and put it in a new jar. I would also add 20 grams of flour and 20 grams of water. That's a small feeding just to keep it on the counter, keep it alive. Now, if I keep it on the counter and I don't put it in the refrigerator, I have to feed it every day, maybe even 2 times a day. If I'm going to put it in the refrigerator, I don't really feed it, maybe once a week, but I always use this. So I'm different because I make so many different products that I use this unfed starter. I use it up, but let's pretend I was working still and I was making 1 loaf of bread on a Saturday. I would have to actually keep feeding this to keep it to be a healthy starter, even if it's not something I'm baking with all the time. Some people keep it in the refrigerator for a month and they never feed it, and they pull it out, they stir it up, and they start feeding it again, and then they can bake bread with it. So it's good for a long time, just even left alone in the refrigerator. This this winter, I went on a vacation and I wasn't doing any baking, and it was in the refrigerator for 10 days. And I took some of it out. I fed it probably 2 or 3 days in a row, and it became active again. So you don't have to feed the stuff in the refrigerator every day, but if you're keeping it on the counter like I do here, I feed it once and sometimes twice in a day. This would be considered a small feeding, 1:1:1. Now, today I'm going to bake with this. So since this is inactive, I can't bake with this one. It's not ready. It's not active. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give this a large feeding so that in 5-6 hours later on today, it will be active and I can mix a loaf of bread with it. So I would do a large feeding. So in a large feeding, I would say it's a 10:10:10 ratio. This is just an example. I might start out with 20 grams in here, or pour it into a new jar, 20 grams. And then I would give it 200 grams of flour and 200 grams of water. That would grow and it would become a lot of volume, and it would be active. And it would probably take about 5 or 6 hours on the heating mat that I use to grow that much and become active. When I know I'm going to make bread, I cheat a little bit. I might start out with 20 grams of starter that already has yeast and already has bacteria in it, even though it's not active. And I might feed it 140 grams of flour and 120 grams of water. I beef it up a little bit. I give it a little bit more food, so the ratio is not perfect, but it makes it a little bit stronger for me. Now, this also was very confusing to me, and I have said it even in this instruction. I have said, if I'm going to feed and make it active, I might take 20 grams of this inactive starter and put it in here and do 20, 140, 120. But here's the confusing part. I don't have to start out with a new jar. I can use this exact same jar and dump out enough starter that I'm only left with 20 in here. That's what these are for. So that's what I will do this afternoon. Rather than make another jar dirty, I will probably just dump some of this out and leave only 20 in the jar, and then feed it water and feed it flour. That's a tricky thing because in the beginning, I wasn't making any of the other sourdough baked goods. I wasn't making any. So when I would fill up these jars, they would just get more and more full and full and full, and I wasn't using any of it. I just had this jar that I kept feeding. So what I did was I would just throw it away. I would honestly get out a paper plate or a plastic bag, and I would dump this in there till I only had 20 grams left. And then I would do my regular feeding to keep the yeast, the wild yeast and bacteria alive in here. And I just threw it away. And at first I thought, boy, oh boy, this is such a waste just to feed this for maybe making 1 loaf of bread a week. Wow, that's a lot of waste. But you know what? It's flour and water. It's not, you're not losing out on a lot of money that you've spent buying the flour and the water. It's just not very much. It doesn't add up to very much money that you're, if you're thinking about the waste. Now that I use the inactive starter that's in the refrigerator, it's called Discard. Now that I use that Discard, I'm really not wasting any. Today I might, because I have so much of this saved, I won't even be able to use it all. So today I might just throw out the extra starter in here to get it down to 20. I might just do that. Okay, if I'm making 2, 4, 6 loaves of bread, which I have done for different orders, then I do use 2 jars and feed 2 feedings, because sometimes I need 2 full jars of starter to make all of that bread. You have to decide how much you need in the end. This is the other tricky part. If you're doing a large feeding, this first number of starter, you get to pick. So I'm saying 20, but some people start with 10 and they do 10, 100, 100. Some people start with 50. And if they're doing a large feeding, they better have a really large jar to do 500, 500. You have to pick that first number. That's why I'm saying when I'm gonna make bread, this is what I choose, just 20 to start with. Do you know that you can start with a tiny little scrap of starter that's already yeast and bacteria? If you start with just a tiny little bit, even 5 grams, starter will grow. So don't worry so much about this first number. The only time I worry about it is if I know the size of the jar. I have had this happen and it makes a huge mess. If I start with too much and then I do a 10 to 10 ratio, it overflows and it's exploded all over my counter. So you don't want to do that either. So you have to judge. And I know I've done it enough to know that this will fill up to the tippy top of this jar. If I do 20, 140, 120 of water, I know that this will fill up the jar. Sometimes I need 2 full jars to bake the bread I need to bake that day. So I know this is really confusing, and sometimes you just have to work it out. You just have to do the feedings and you'll get better and better at it. Now, in order for starter to become active, and I told you that this, even though I fed it, it's not active at all. It's very liquidy, and there are some bubbles, but they're just loose bubbles. In order to know, this was very difficult for me to understand in the beginning. I didn't understand when my starter was considered active or starving. This is starving. It needs to be fed. There are things to look for. For example, the starter would be domed and very puffy, like pillowy puffy with big, huge bubbles and almost stringy once you start to tip it. I don't know if any of you saw, one day I posted on Facebook that, because I call my starter Piglet, you have to name your starter, by the way, I learned that. I showed Piglet and I pushed a spatula into Piglet and it was making this very loud kind of creepy noise like it was alive, then you know it's active and ready to bake with. This, if I put a spatula in, it's just liquidy like, I guess I would compare it to a muffin batter or a cake batter right now. You know how brownie batter is thicker? So you want it to be thicker but honestly very bubbly and puffy. So that's how you'll know it's ready. So I'm going to feed this and then hopefully later on today, like I said, about 5 or 6 hours later, it will be active. So I'm going to pour this out to where I only have 20 left. Okay, important thing to know. Know the weight of your jar. I know my jar is 476 grams. I wrote it on the bottom of the jar in the beginning in Sharpie, and it stays so then you know how much your jar weighs. Because now when I put it on the scale, I'm gonna make sure it says 0 grams, and I put it on here, and it says 706. So this is way more than 20. I want it to say 500. That's usually what I go with. So 476. And then I usually pour out the extra starter that's not active that I don't need till it says 500. So I guess it's not exactly 20, but close to 20. So I'm gonna open up one of these cruddy jars. This one's almost full. It's all gunked up. I might not even have enough room in this jar, so I'm gonna get this one ready too. This one's really gunked up. And that's all they look like inside, just kind of icky, but it's still good. I could just stir it up and bake with it. So I'm gonna pour some in here because this one's almost full. And then I'm gonna go over here and pour some in here because this one's almost full. I do have orders to make this week, so I'll be using this. And you can see how it is very liquidy. This is not active starter. This is starving starter. And I'm gonna see if I should have had this ready, a spatula in here to use to get it out. And it's going to seem like you barely have any left. And trust me, it will still grow. So if I put it on here, it's 511, so I'm still gonna get even more out of here. See if I can get it down closer to 500. 505, I'm gonna call it good. Move these out of the way. And I had told you that that's giving me actually, if I think about it, about 30 grams in there. So I'm gonna do 120 of water because I don't want an overflow. So I put it back down to 0. Remember to do that. That's called tearing your scale. So it's back down to 0 because I want to make sure I put 120 and I don't want to have to keep adding it together. So here I go. $120. And then I take my spatula and give that a good mix. Stir it all up before I add the flour. Scrape the sides, get all that inactive starter mixed in. And make a mess, because I always spill and make a mess everywhere. But that should be good. Okay, lay that down. Put it back on here, but tear it again. Put it back to 0. And then remember how I told you I cheat on the ratio? So even though I did 30 grams of starter, 120 of water, I'm going to do more than 120 of flour because I want to beef it up because I want to get it ready to bake with. I noticed this morning that Jack ate our last piece of sourdough, so I need to bake some for my family. So I'm gonna just put a little flour in at a time. That's 40. Now I'm up to 90. Getting there. Okay, and that's 140. So now I'm going to stir this up. I want it to be thick. Always on videos I would see that people say, like pancake batter, I say way thicker than pancake batter. You want it to be almost like it's hard to stir. That's why I like having a little bit not such a flexible, bendable spatula, because it really has to be strong and sturdy to stir this. And you can get an arm workout this way. So you just make sure all the powder is stirred in. And again, scrape the sides. So you can see how thick it is on the camera, maybe. If I can, it's very thick. Here, let me see if I can scoop some out so you can see. It doesn't even really drip very quickly. That's how thick I like it, so that it grows to be an active starter. So I told you that one of the ways you can tell if your starter has become active again is it looks domed and very thick on the top. Now, another way that helped me in the beginning, and it's kind of fun to see, is you use a rubber band to measure. So I'm gonna put the rubber band and mark it where my starter is in the jar. Put the lid on. You're never gonna put the lid on tight. These lids don't fit tight. So if you have a jar like this, take the lid and just set it on. When I put it in the refrigerator, I put it a little bit tighter. But when I'm trying to grow it, I just set it on top. You want air to be able to get in. So that's another reason I like these weck jars, because you just set them on and they're not on tight. So here's my rubber band. I want this by this afternoon to more than double in size. So doubling and even more would be great. I always got this to fill up all the way to the tippy top. Then I can use it for baking. If I put too much in, remember, it will explode and come out and leak all over and make a huge mess. So this is the ratio that works best for me for baking. If I'm just feeding it like I did last night, I might do a much smaller feeding. I did more than this, a 1-to-1-to-1, but this is what you will see online all the time that people do, is a 1-to-1-to-1. But then it doesn't grow to be very much, probably not enough to even bake a loaf of bread. So last part, and there's just so much more I could have told you and explained, but we'll just take it a little at a time. Remember how I told you I have to use this warming mat? So right now, because I want this to grow and become active, I put it on my warming mat. If I did it like everybody else that I see online, and I just set it on my counter and walked away, it wouldn't grow. It would take hours, and then it probably still wouldn't grow enough. My house is just too cold, and sometimes the surfaces in my kitchen are too cold, and it just never warms up enough. It needs to have some heat. One tip that I have seen people do is they have a setting on their oven, and I don't remember what it's called. Skip that. It's not very common for people to have a fermentation setting on their oven, but I have seen people that do. Some people just turn their oven light on and it provides a little bit of heat, and they set this in their oven, and then that provides enough heat for it to grow. But they run into problems because then somebody comes and turns the oven on, and then it ruins it explodes in their oven and it makes a big mess. But some people do just use the oven light on trick. I use the warming mat, so I'm gonna put it on here. And then what I do is I fold up the sides. I don't know if you can see that very well. And then I put the water jug here to hold it. And then I fold up the other side, and I honestly wrap it up like it's in a little bed or a little cocoon. And then I put the flour on this side to hold this side. And then I even take towels and lay it over the top to give it even more warmth. And then I walk away and leave it. If I looked in 2 hours, it will look like nothing has happened. But like I said, hopefully in 5 hours, 6 hours, it will have more than doubled in size, probably tripled in size, and then it's time to bake, and then it's active. So if you have questions, ask me. If you're starting a starter, that's a whole different ball game. That took me forever to grow my own starter. If you would like some starter, you just have to come and ask me, bring me a jar, and I will pour some of my active starter in, and then you go from there and you can do some baking too. So have a good day, and I will come back later on today and show you my active starter, what it looks like.